Hello, and welcome to our final Dorset Council Local Plan webinar. This time covering our economy, community, and how we collect money from development. Our speakers today are Chris Lee, Planning Policy Officer, Anne Goldsmith, Senior Planning Policy Officer, and Andrew Galpin, Implementation Manager. I'm Councillor David Walsh, Portfolio Holder for Planning at Dorset Council, and one of 3 ward councillors for the Gillingham area. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you of a few housekeeping points that will help you get the most out of this session. The speaker's presentation will run for approximately 30 minutes. Following this, we will answer the questions that we have received. Any further questions will either be answered on our website or, if applicable, at a different webinar. Go to www.dorsetcouncil.gov.uk and search Dorset Council Local Plan webinars for more details. If you lose connection to the session, then please try rejoining. You may want to ensure your Wi-Fi is at an optimum level by disconnecting all other devices that use Wi-Fi. So you might be wondering what a local plan is and why it is so important. A local plan sets out the future of Dorset until 2038. That's a 17-year timescale. I like to see it as from birth to getting your provisional driving licence. That's a heck of a timescale. It outlines the strategy for the growth Dorset needs. So housing, jobs, shops, community services such as schools are in the right places and are of the right character and quality. It also helps to protect our unique environment and acts to help alleviate our impact on the climate. To help plan for you, your children's and your grandchildren's future, we need you to get involved. Our consultation lasts until the 15th of March. It will have covered an 8-week period. That is more than a normal consultation as set out in our Statement of Community Involvement. Because we are consulting whilst in lockdown, we wanted to take a little longer to try and ensure we can get as many people as possible to let them know about the plan and have time to respond and have their say. Unfortunately, we cannot take any longer as this would delay the adoption of the local plan, and we need to progress with the plan to help us manage development appropriately. Go to www.dorsetcouncil.gov.uk, Dorset Council Local Plan, for more details, and tell your friends and family about the plan to enable them to have their say. Anyway, back to this webinar. It sets out our proposals for employment land, town centres, and how we collect money from development. So I'll now hand over to Chris Lee to help us understand more about these proposals.
Thank you, David. So in today's webinar, we'll start by talking about employment land, its definition, and our strategy for identifying and allocating land for employment uses, as well as the plan's approach to protecting employment sites. I'll then hand over to Anne, who will discuss the importance of town centres, the challenges that face them, and the plan's approach to defining a hierarchy of centres and the strategy for development within them, as well as covering community infrastructure. Finally, Andy will talk about how we generate money from development and what this money will pay for. This will include a summary of our timelines for the Community Infrastructure Levy, or CIL, review programme. We will then be answering relevant questions. So for planning purposes, the definition of employment has generally included offices, industrial, storage and warehousing. And these types of industries continue to be supported in the Dorset Council Local Plan. But the economy is more diverse than this, so the definition in the plan also supports other uses that provide direct, ongoing employment opportunities appropriate for employment sites. But of course, not all jobs are on industrial estates and business parks. A relatively high proportion of our workforce are employed in jobs linked to Dorset's rural and coastal nature, like tourism and farming, or in town centre uses like retail. The impacts and needs of these industries are diverse, so the local plan has specific policies on these other types of economic development, and we'll be looking at the approach to our town centres later in the webinar. A prosperous local economy is vital to achieving the strategic priorities of the Dorset Council, in particular to deliver sustainable economic growth, increase productivity and the number of high-quality jobs in Dorset, creating great places to live, work and visit. Dorset Council's economic growth strategy gives more detail and sets out our ambitions, which include enabling clean, inclusive, sustainable and good quality economic growth across the whole council area. You can read more about the economic growth strategy on our website. As Dorset's population grows, employment opportunities are central to the maintenance of balanced, sustainable and prosperous communities. The local plan can help deliver sustainable growth by enabling employment development in the right locations, as well as making provision for homes for workers and other infrastructure needed for growth. So just how much employment land do we need in the Dorset Council area? Our latest projections suggest that by 2038, economic growth in the Dorset Council area will lead to the creation of up to 21,000 new jobs across all industries. We estimate this will result in a need for between 131 and 151 hectares of employment land. The overall need for employment land is set out in the Development Strategy section of the local plan, and more information on the projections can be found on our website. We note that recent events such as Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic could profoundly impact the local and wider economy, so further work is needed to understand this, and that work will feed into the next stage of the local plan production. So what is the local plan strategy for meeting this need? We've considered the benefits of concentrating most development in locations where homes, jobs and facilities can be easily accessible to each other, such as those settlements with development boundaries. This will provide people with the opportunity to work locally and reduce the need to travel. To help meet the demand, sites for employment uses have been identified and allocated at some of the larger, more sustainable settlements. Altogether, around 161 hectares of employment land have been identified. Some sites have been allocated solely for employment uses, and others are expected to bring forward employment through part of a comprehensive mixed-use development. The selection of allocated sites has been influenced by a number of factors. We've looked at the size and roles of the settlements, the availability of land, the need to support existing employment sites, as well as the environmental constraints of the area. This process has also been informed by the former Dorset authorities' progress on their local plan reviews, including previous consultations, existing allocations, and other evidence studies. But not all employment will come through allocated sites at existing settlements. Opportunities in more rural parts of the area are also important. Here, instead of site allocations, suitable economic activities are supported through flexible policies, while also considering the impacts of development on the environment and local character. So allocations have been made across the local plan area in each of the 4 functional areas covering Dorset. More information on the functional areas can be found in the Distribution of Development webinar or Development Strategy section of the local plan. There are around 9 hectares of employment allocations identified at sites in Western Dorset, broken down to about 4.5 hectares in Beaminster and 4.8 hectares in Bridport. 33 hectares of employment land is allocated in central Dorset, with around 17 hectares at Dorchester, 13 hectares in Weymouth, 0.8 hectares on Portland and 2.5 hectares at Crossways. Sites at Gillingham with 12.8 hectares, Shaftesbury with 6.6 hectares, Sherborne with 8 hectares, Stallbridge with 0.7 hectares and Sturminster Newton with 2.9 hectares will amount to around 31 hectares of employment land in northern Dorset. And sites across a number of settlements in the south-eastern Dorset function area account for in the region of 88 hectares. Most significantly, around 12.9 hectares at Walls Bridge near St Leonard's and St Ives, 6.87 hectares in Blandford, up to 40.5 hectares in Ferndown and West Parley, and 38.4 hectares in Wool. It's worth noting that some sites will help meet the needs of a much wider area than the functional area they are in. For instance, Dorset Innovation Park at Winthrop is an advanced engineering cluster of excellence for the whole of the South West. So we've talked about the provision of new employment sites, but the protection of existing sites also forms an important part of our strategy. Existing employment sites can often come under pressure for change to non-employment uses. Their loss can reduce local job opportunities and the range of premises available. The local plan has identified over 70 key employment sites, and these contribute significantly to the supply of employment land. They often provide a location for development that's not compatible with residential areas and are of importance for their contribution to the economy and the supply of jobs. Key sites are generally larger existing employment sites, as well as local plan allocations, but they can also include smaller locally important sites. These sites are protected for employment uses, and development here must be compatible with the employment role of the site. Of course, there are other employment locations and premises outside these key employment sites. Although these are important in providing jobs for local people, a more flexible approach is taken to the development of these other non-key sites. In thinking about the protection of employment sites, it's important to understand that there may be cases where permitted development rights allow changes without the need for planning permission and so cannot be controlled by local plan policies. Central government recently created the new enterprise use class, bringing together previously separate uses into one new E class, which includes, among other things, shops, restaurants, cafes, offices, and light industrial uses. This gives more flexibility for change between these uses, as changes of activity within the same use class don't need planning permission and aren't limited by a building's location. As a result, the ability of the local plan to control these uses is reduced, which has impacts for our employment sites and also our town centres. I'll now hand you over to Anne, who's going to talk more about the town centres in the Dorset Council area.
Thanks, Chris. Town centres are at the heart of communities and are important not only for giving access to shops, services and employment, but also for the opportunities to socialise, which can help to tackle loneliness and social isolation. A thriving town centre also helps to foster pride of place and a sense of well-being, promotes local identity and contributes to the aims of sustainable development. Whilst undoubtedly COVID-19 is having a profound impact on our high streets, town centres have been facing challenging times for several years as online retailing has grown and consumer behaviours have changed. Even before the pandemic, many town centres were experiencing a drop in footfall and a rise in empty premises. One such casualty was Dorchester's Marks and Spencer store, which closed a month before the start of the first lockdown. So in many respects, COVID is both accelerating changes that were already taking place and further highlighting the need for town centres to reinvent themselves. The local plan's role in helping town centres to adapt and revitalise is through policies which both continue to recognise the importance of thriving town centres and which also support diversification to a broader range of compatible uses that will encourage people to visit and spend both time and money. Clearly, though, the long-term effects of COVID and these changes on our town centres are unknown. Not every town centre is the same, and some may recover better than others from the pandemic. For example, smaller centres might benefit from an increase in those of us home working as the norm after COVID, rather than commuting into larger centres. As such, these policies need to be flexible so that town centres are supported in whatever way is needed for them to adapt and be revitalised. Before I go on to talk about policies within the draft plan, I first want to mention the forecast of long-term need for new retail and commercial leisure development. These can be found within the individual town centre chapters. These figures are based on forecasts in evidence-based studies carried out for the previous local authorities that now make up Dorset Council. There's always uncertainty in forecasting long-term retail trends and consumer behaviour, and whilst, as I've previously mentioned, the long-term effects of COVID are unknown, it is thought that there could be implications for these forecasts. We are therefore having the existing evidence base refreshed in time for the next stage of the local plan. So how does the local plan support town centres? This is done firstly by identifying the network and hierarchy of centres within the Dorset Council area and applying the principle of town centres first when considering proposals for new development. Based on previous local plan work and the current evidence base, a three-tier hierarchy has been identified. This comprises of town centres, district centres and local centres. Out-of-centre retail parks and small shopping parades of only neighbourhood significance do not appear in hierarchy as these are not classed as centres. At the top of the hierarchy are town centres. These are the principal centres within the area, functioning as important service centres and providing a range of facilities and services for extensive rural catchment areas. The town centres within the South East functional area are Blandford Forum, Ferndown, Swanage, Verwood, Wareham and Wimborne. The town centres within the central functional area are Dorchester and Weymouth. The town centres within the northern functional area are Gillingham, Shaftesbury, Sherborne and Sturminster Newton, whilst the town centres within the western functional area are Bridport and Lyme Regis. Below town centres in the hierarchy come district centres. These usually comprise of groups of shops, sometimes including a supermarket, and a range of non-retail services, as well as local public facilities, such as maybe a library. The district centres within the South East functional area are Upton and West Moors. There is one district centre within the central functional area, which is Queen Mother Square at Poundbury in Dorchester, whilst within the northern functional area, Stallbridge is the only district centre. There are no district centres within the western functional area. Local centres are at the bottom of the hierarchy, and these include a range of small shops of a local nature, serving a small catchment. In rural areas, some large villages perform the role of a local centre. The local centres within the South East functional area are Beer Regis, Corfe Castle, Corfe Mullen, Litchett Matravers, West Parley and Wool. The local centres within the central functional area are Chickerell, Easton Square and Fortunes Well on Portland, and at Weymouth, Abbotsbury Road, Lodmore Hill, the Littlemore and South Hill centres, and also Portland Road at Wyke Regis. Marnell is identified as a local centre within the northern functional area, whilst Beminster and West Bay are local centres in the western functional area. Supporting and promoting the vitality and viability of these existing centres is a priority for the local plan, so these should be the locations for any new development appropriate to town centres, with those central settlements in the top tier of the hierarchy being first choice. At the same time, a sequential approach is applied which directs new development firstly to locations within a town centre area, followed secondly by edge of centre locations. Only if there are no sites available or expected to become available within a reasonable period are out of centre locations then considered. and these will need to be served by sustainable transport. More detail about the sequential approach and how it is applied is set out in the local plan. A proposal for a new edge of centre or out of centre development above a certain size needs an assessment carried out of its likely impact on the existing centre. The draft local plan lists the variety of size thresholds currently applied across Dorset's centre network. These thresholds are being reviewed as part of the evidence base refresh to inform the next stage of the local plan. The boundaries of town centre areas, where a range of town centre uses are found, and primary shopping areas, where retail uses are concentrated, are shown on the local plan policies map. Where there is no primary shopping area identified on the map, then the town centre area is treated as the primary shopping area. The local plan supports development proposals appropriate to these areas and to the role of the particular centre within the hierarchy. To maintain a lively, inviting street scene and promote a safe, secure environment within primary shopping areas, the local plan expects proposals for new developments to have good quality, active ground floor frontages, even when there is a change of use away from retail. Opportunities are also expected to be taken to enhance the public realm to increase footfall and vibrancy. The use of upper floors for offices or residential uses is encouraged through the local plan as it adds vitality to town centres without fragmenting the retail and services on the ground floors. The contribution markets make to the vitality and diversity of a town centre and the low-risk opportunities they provide for new enterprises is also recognised in the local plan. Finally, I earlier set out how town centres are facing challenges and not just from COVID. There is, though, a further challenge, and this is the recent introduction by central government of the new e-use class, which Chris has previously referred to. Whilst a simpler process for changing the use of a town centre building introduced by this legislation may help to reduce the numbers of vacant premises, it has significant implications for the planning system's ability to manage town centres to support and promote their vitality and viability, including by having made it easier to deliver out-of-centre retail and leisure developments. This means that we have to give further thought to how we plan for future town centre development and how this can be reflected in the local plan. I'm now going to briefly talk about community infrastructure. To support our communities, a wide variety of facilities, services and infrastructure are needed. These are provided across the plan area by various businesses and other organisations. The local plan sets out our approach to the provision of these uses and in some cases their retention. You can find out more in the plan itself. Among other things, the local plan includes policies that protects existing community buildings unless they are surplus to requirement or being replaced, sets standards for recreation, sports and play provision, looks to restrict hot food takeaways near schools, play areas, youth clubs and other places where young people congregate, sets out standards for parking space provision, including electric vehicle charging points, requires full fibre to property broadband on major sites, establishes policies for renewable energy proposals, sets out the approach to securing infrastructure to support development. I'll now pass you over to Andy, who's going to look in more detail at securing infrastructure to support development.
Thank you, Anne. Planning plays a fundamental role in helping to ensure that the impacts of development are appropriately mitigated and that the right infrastructure is in place to support it. Developer contributions is a collective term mainly used to refer to the Community Infrastructure Levy, CIL, and planning obligations, commonly referred to as Section 106 or S106 obligations after Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act. I'll go into each of these in more detail later on, but in short, these are planning tools that can be used to secure financial and non-financial contributions or other works to provide infrastructure to support and mitigate the impact of development. Development may also be required to deliver highways works secured under Section 278 of the Highways Act. Since 2010, authorities in England and Wales have had the ability to establish a community infrastructure levy to help pay for infrastructure to support development. This charge on development can operate alongside Section 106. SIL and Section 106 are similar in that they are tools to address the impacts of development, but Section 106 is designed to mitigate the specific impacts of development, while SIL is a tool to deal with the cumulative impacts of development. The tools we currently use were developed by the predecessor councils and remain applicable through existing adopted local plan policies. So let's explore the various ways of securing money from development. To start with, we will talk about Section 106 planning obligations. The requirements of planning obligations are identified in planning policy documents and consulted on and tested for viability. Some speculative development proposals may trigger the need for bespoke obligations, which are negotiated on a case-by-case basis. When making decisions about planning applications, we consider whether otherwise unacceptable development could be made acceptable through the use of conditions or planning obligations. Planning obligations are secured through a legal agreement, and contributions are payable at the time specified in the agreement. This will usually, but not exclusively, be on the commencement of development. The contributions are index linked to ensure that the contribution reflects present day costs. Payments can only be used for the specific purposes defined in the agreement, and the spend of Section 106 contributions is often time restricted by clauses in the legal agreement, and monies which are no longer needed or unspent may need to be returned. In some cases, there may be scope to vary the original agreement or undertaking, but any variation will be subject to the same policy and viability tests. Section 106 has been a platform for providing a wide variety of infrastructure, including new schools, highway and nature conservation improvements. Now let's move on to talk about Community Infrastructure Levy, or SIL for short. Community Infrastructure Levy can support a wide variety of infrastructure types. It cannot support the delivery of affordable homes. Local planning authorities set, charge and administer SIL in line with the SIL regulations. 4 SIL charging schedules currently serve the Dorset Council area. The rates and uses which apply vary across these areas, details of which can be found on our website. The former North Dorset District Council area is the only part of Dorset Council without SIL in place. Instead, mitigation is sought through planning obligations. Unlike planning obligations, SIL is a fixed, non-negotiable charge and applies to most development of 100 square metres or more, or a new dwelling of any size. Exemptions from SIL can be sought in respect of self-built housing, affordable housing, charitable development, residential annexes and residential extensions. Payment is on commencement of development, and larger payments can be phased. Twice a year we pass 15% of the SIL income generated by development in town and parishes to the governing body. The proportion increases to 25% where a neighbourhood plan has been made. The remaining SIL income is retained by us to spend. Due to recent changes in national planning legislation, we now have greater choice and flexibility over how to spend the SIL we retain. In 2020, we introduced and implemented governance arrangements for spending SIL. These arrangements ensure that SIL money is spent in the predecessor charging area in which it was sought and is spent on infrastructure categories identified by the predecessor council prior to the legislation changes. A first round of SIL spend concluded in January this year, with awards being agreed by Cabinet. Some of the infrastructure projects benefiting from SIL include highway improvement schemes, waste management and sports facility enhancements. Some projects such as habitat protection and flood defence have come forward as a result of long-standing commitments with partner organisations such as Natural England and the Environment Agency. We are committed to spending SIL on infrastructure which supports development, and further opportunities to spend SIL will take place later this year. The charging schedules which are currently in place have been operating between 4 and 8 years. When Dorset Council formed, it became the charging and collecting authority for Community Infrastructure Levy, taking ownership of the existing charging schedules. It is necessary to replace the area charging schedules with one new charging schedule. This process may result in a change in the current rates and uses which are currently subject to a charge. The process will see the former North Dorset area served by a single charging schedule 2. To introduce a new charge, evidence is necessary demonstrating that the levy is needed to fund infrastructure to support development. We are currently collecting information about infrastructure needs through the local plan consultation, alongside engaging with infrastructure providers and stakeholders. Before the new charge can take effect, the charging schedule must be subject to consultation and an independent examination to consider whether the charge is needed to meet infrastructure costs and viable for most developments to pay. A revised charging schedule is planned for adoption alongside the new local plan in 2023. Once adopted and implemented, it will replace the current charging schedules. When developing new policies and requirements, it is important to recognise that the scope for developer contributions is finite. We need to consider what basic infrastructure is required. For example, the road junction into a site, the water mains and sewage connections. We need to consider what mitigation is required as a basic minimum for placemaking, for example, schools, public open space and affordable housing. We ask ourselves, how can existing infrastructure be improved if impacted by development? Early identification of infrastructure needs provides certainty to developers and the public and helps bring development forward. Whole plan viability testing is undertaken prior to examination to establish whether the development proposals are viable. This testing helps establish whether policies and seal rates are appropriate. When developing policies, we can establish a choice of developer contribution mechanism. This final slide sets out the infrastructure policy for the new Dorset Council Local Plan. The purpose of the policy is to explain how and when the developer contribution tools will be used to support development. Infrastructure needs for complex development allocations will be secured by Section 106 to ensure that the needs of the site and its surroundings are appropriately managed. Mitigation for simpler allocations and speculative development will be secured by SIL. So Section 106 agreements will accompany SIL on proposals of 10 or more dwellings to secure affordable housing. By recognising the site-specific needs of the large-scale development, the local plan proposes that the infrastructure needs of larger, more complex allocations are met solely through the use of planning obligation mechanism. As such, they were deemed SIL liable, but will be subject to a nil charge. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, Christopher and Anne. People will now have a better understanding about our policies for employment land, town centres and how we collect money from development. And can I remind people to find out more about our economic growth strategy and SIL, please go onto our website and look them up there. That's on dorsetcouncil.co.uk/Dorset Council Local Plan. So please do that. Make the most of it. Right, so we've had quite a few questions come forward. So if all the speakers could turn their microphones and videos on, I'll get started. Thank you. And the first one to Chris. Chris, how are the employment land quantities calculated? Why don't you use job numbers?
Thank you, David. So the employment land quantities are calculated using economic projections to arrive at an expected number of new jobs. And the job forecast is included in the development strategy of the local plan. However, as the local plan is about land use, this jobs figure has been translated into a need for employment land to enable us to make allocations for development. The detail of how this is done is included in the workspace strategy, which is available on our website.
Thank you, Chris. Next one. Land is allocated for employment, Chris, yet training will be vital in future. Why has land for training not been quantified?
That's a good question. Thanks, David. Good education and training facilities are key to making sure that our workforce has appropriate skills. We work with education providers, the LEP, and our economic development team to identify a strategy and sufficient land to enable them to implement their plans. Where new homes are built, any additional demand for education and training will usually be catered for through the expansion of existing provision, where specific requirements for expanded provision have been identified as a result of demand for generated by plan development. These are set out in the site-specific policies of the plan. Where an existing training facility has a known development requirement, such as at Kingston Moorwood College in Dorchester, the local plan has included a specific policy in response. Elsewhere, rather than make allocations of land, the plan has taken a more flexible approach with policy supporting the provision of new, replacement and expanded facilities, and they're subject to several criteria.
Thank you very much, Chris. Andrew, why does the council allow development which doesn't meet the requirements for affordable housing?
That's a good question. I think it's come up in other webinars too. For development to take place on the ground, the value generated from the development must exceed the cost of undertaking. If, however, the costs exceed the revenue, the development would be considered unviable. Policy requirements including affordable housing are recognised as development costs, and our policies allow for the negotiation of affordable housing to be subject to viability appraisal. Where proposals fail to meet policy expectations, the council requires applicants to provide a comprehensive assessment of development viability. That assessment is then independently appraised by an independent body, for example the District Valuation Service, to determine whether the assumptions made about the value and cost are accurate and justified. Depending on the outcome of the independent appraisal, this process can lead to a shift in position, for better or for worse. The findings of the assessment form part of the local planning authority's decision whether to approve or refuse planning permission. Undertaking viability appraisal at plan making stage helps reduce the need for appraisals at planning application stage.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I'm pleased that these sessions are recorded so people can listen to that time and time again and fully understand it. Finally, Andrew, what can town and parish councils spend their proportion of CIL on?
Okay, just to put it into context, during the last financial year, nearly £600,000 was transferred to town and parishes across the Dorset Council area. This money must be used by town and parish councils to support the development of their area. The neighbourhood CIL can fund the provision, improvement, replacement, operation or maintenance of infrastructure needed to support development. This is a broad definition and allows greater flexibility to the way Dorset Council can spend CIL. For example, town and parishes can invest in the provision of affordable housing, or alternatively use funding to develop neighbourhood plans, whereas Dorset Council cannot. Further information about the neighbourhood proportion of CIL can be found on the Dorset Council website.
Thank you very much indeed. And that is to all of you. I feel that the presentations today, people will have gained an awful lot by listening to these. So just a reminder, any questions we didn't get time for will be answered either at a different webinar or on our website within 2 weeks, along with a recorded presentation. Have a look at our webpage for more information on other webinars or podcasts if you're interested in other subjects. Well, that was the final webinar. So thank you once again. Goodbye for now.